Hello, everyone. In today's video, we're going to go over one way you might consider taking separate information that's input into a repeating item block within Gavel and then combining those different pieces of information into a single block, such as this information block here, which you could then take and copy and paste into, let's say, a text area question, for example, and continue through to have this information populate in an output document where that output document would have that information here within a single variable that looks like this. Now, one of the cool things about this, and in this particular setup, I have this within two separate workflows where I'm having this information get fed into this second workflow, is that even though and because I have that information pushing from one workflow into another, I can actually use the information and variables that aren't even in this second workflow in the output document as well as in the workflow itself. And this will work both internally when you're using a data manager to push the information, as well as when the person takes these in a particular order when they're logged in as a user, for example. So this is pretty fun. And the reason why I've done this here is that I'm differentiating between when there's only one shareholder. So I want this to say shareholder's address versus when there's more than one shareholder and I want to say shareholders' addresses. So we're going to go through this step by step so you can see how this goes. I also want to quickly shout out Alex for making a great comment on one of my past videos that inspired this video today. He was asking about how you might consider doing this kind of same type of thing that I was able to demonstrate in invisible logic, how you can combine and push invisible logic variables together, and how you might be able to do this type of thing with a repeating item, asking whether you would just end up having to place all of those variables as needed in the document versus creating a single variable. So I suggested that this is one way he might consider doing this type of thing, where the desired outcome would be that you would have a way to have a repeating item information where there's separate information, such as the way that this address was broken up, combined into a single variable that could be pushed into an output document, for example, or in other places around a workflow. I also suggested that he take a look at this very helpful article from Gavel called Text Based on Prior Answers. The reason for this is at the bottom of this particular help article, there is a part that says repeating item choices. If you want to display all of the repeating item choices a user has previously entered, you can do the following, only changing these different parts below. So you would need to change item name and item attribute. So if you just take this and you put this within your workflow, then you'd be able to see what somebody put into a repeating item. So I took this information and I just kind of put it to use in the way that this person or Alex wanted this to possibly show. So let's go through it from the beginning. So in this particular scenario, I've created a first push test here, repeating items push 1, and a second workflow called push 2. Within push 1, if we go into the editor, what we'll see is that I have created a single repeating item called shareholders, where I've given it the name company shareholders, where I've asked the question separately for name, mailing address, street, city, state, and zip code. I have a second page here where I just wanted to test this configuration to see if this is outputting the way that I wanted it to. I don't have any output documents here, and I've just changed the settings to have some custom CSS. I've changed the final message to thank you, and I've made it to where the person has to be logged in order to use this. The reason for this is the second workflow within this particular sequence is going to require the information that's in this one to have been completed first for it to populate correctly. So it depends on how you're setting this up, but I would suggest in this particular scenario, you would want your users to be logged in if you're going to have them take this one first, and then you're going to have them take the second one next. You could also put this into a bundle, which was just released recently, which would require someone to be logged in anyway. So that's all I've done in this particular one is I have one repeating item with these separate questions and then a test output where I just wanted to see how this would look on output. If we actually run this, it looks like this from the beginning where I can put in a shareholder's information with their name and so on. I could add another, but all of this has been required. Since I've already started that here, I'll just show you that I have that here. I've said continue. I could add another one if I wanted to, and then I can continue. I can see that test output and then continue to the end. One other setting I have in this particular one is that I skipped the final review page. Now, in the second workflow that I created, what I've done here is what I wanted to do is just make it to where I could see that same information that gets input into the first workflow when it's either pushed into this one or when somebody's logged in and they've already taken that first one. They would be able to see the answers that were given in that last session in this instruction block at the top. And then I have one question that asks for shareholder information, and the variable name I've given it is shareholder name and address block. The settings I have for this one is I've changed some custom styling here. I have customized my message to say thank you, and I've made it to where the person needs to be logged in. For the output document that I have here, what I've done is I've created a Word document where this is the fun part. So what I essentially had initially is I just made it to where I said that I just wanted to insert the information, the questions, and the variables from this particular workflow. So I went into my document tagger and I went into start. And once I got signed in, I searched for my workflow that I'm working from, which in this case is test repeating items push 2. I went to simple variables and I said insert all questions and variables, and then I said insert variable. Now you can see it says shareholder information, and then I just moved this down. And in this particular case, what I also did was I formatted this to make the paragraph spacing just 0 so I could have more control over it. And in this case, I just moved it down 1 so that there would be a nice break here first before the information. Now, when I originally did this, the question was shareholders' addresses. So what I could do here is either keep it at shareholder information and then just keep this here. I could add manual line breaks if I wanted to. But what I could do here is if I wanted to say like shareholders information, but make it to where if there's only one shareholder, I just have one apostrophe and it appears here, then I can do this actually not by using logic within this workflow, but actually by using logic within the first workflow. So, because I know that this will always come after the first one. So obviously that would need to be the case in yours as well. Otherwise, it's not going to work. You're going to get an error. But if I know that the information is going to get pushed from repeating items push 1, then I can really play with this. I can say, because there's a repeating item there, I can make different things show or hide depending on how many there are in that first one. So, for example, if I know that shareholders will show this apostrophe if there's only one, or it's exactly equal to one shareholder that's entered, then I can say show phrase when the number of company shareholders is exactly equal to 1, and I can insert that condition from that first workflow. Now I can also make it to where this apostrophe only shows if the number of company shareholders is greater than 1, and I insert that condition. Now I've done the same thing here you can kind of choose one or the other. So maybe if I wanted to take this part off and I wanted to move this up, what I can do here is I can save this. I can also just directly, in this particular case, I need to go back to workflow 2. Now, if I hadn't actually put this inside of the workflow, I'd first need to save this and then attach this by choosing the file from here. But since it's already in here and I just made some updates to it, I can just update this directly from within my Word add-in by selecting the document here and saying update in Gavel. Once I do and I run this, what will happen is the shareholders information will show up like this with one apostrophe for the S when there's only one. And then when there are more than one, then I can see that shareholder has had the apostrophe show up after the S after shareholders. So that's completely up to you how you want this to show. But now that we have this all set up and either we have upload this into our output document section, or if we, in my case, had it and made some updates, we just updated it directly from within our Word add-in. So this is really fun because I actually haven't tried this before where I've used information from a previous or variables and kind of logic from a previous workflow into one that gets pushed exactly like this. So this is fun for me as well. So what we can do now is go through and test this, how it would work from internally, as well as if we gave these to an end user or someone who is logged into their accounts as a user on our subdomains. So what we would do if we didn't have this in a bundle, for example, is we would, let's say internally first, we would go to our repeating item push one first. Let's go ahead and run it. So I'm going to give the example of Ana Miguel Ruiz, and then her address is 123 Shareholder 1 Street at Shareholder 1 City, Shareholder 1 State, with a zip code of 12345. We can add another. And one obviously way that you could change this would be to have an initial question, and you could have it to where these show up on different pages with a continuation question, such as, are there any more shareholders, and so on. But let's just say in this case that I just have it here with all of them on the same page. So let's say that shareholder number 2 would be Juan Ruiz, let's say Maynes, for example. And then this person's address is 123 Shareholder 2 Street, and they live at S2 or Shareholder 2 City, and it's Shareholder 2 State, and their zip code is also 12345. So we're going to go ahead and continue. Then we're going to continue again, and we can just see this is just this test output. You wouldn't necessarily have this, but maybe you would if you wanted this to be an interim sort of review page, for example. And then we would just continue to make sure that this all gets saved within our data manager. So now I'm going to go into my data manager here in my dashboard, go by workflow, look for the past sessions that I have here that I just ran, for example. So I can see over here the information for Donna Miguel Ruiz, as well as Juan Ruiz Maynes in this particular case. Now, what I can do with this information is take this particular session and push it into another workflow where another workflow will be push to test. So let's go ahead and push this. Now we can see Donna Miguel Ruiz, and Juan Ruiz Maynes from these different pieces of information. I can just review that, make sure all is good. I can copy and paste it into my text area question here. Continue, and then continue, where on output, I'd be able to see the information in the output document, where I can take a look at the PDF, and I can see all of the information here and here. And then I can also see that the shareholders information, because there's more than one, has been updated based on that answer. Now, let's say that instead I wanted to see and make sure that it works when I only have one shareholder. Then I can look for one where I have just one shareholder. So in this case, I have one here. I can push that one into the second workflow, take that information, drop it in here, continue and continue. And now when I check out this information, it says shareholders information because there's only one, and you see the one person's information here. Now, the other thing we can do is test to see how this works when we have someone who is a user take this information. So let's go into Sohail's session here. And he has an account already. So he's just a regular user where he can see his past sessions. You can see that I've already tested this before. I can see his past answers. But let's say that I've actually, in this case, I think I've deleted these two. So I'm just going through and deleting them so we can have a fresh start with this one, starting from the beginning where he hasn't done this ever. So what we would do is, let's say we didn't have a bundle, we gave him these two links separately. I would find that link. Let's say I gave it in an email or had it on my website or whatever else. I would go ahead and give that to him. Make sure he's logged in by having that be required as part of this particular workflow's access permissions. So we would put in the name of shareholder one, and let's just put shareholder one's name. I'm just going to pause and fill out some information here. I'm going to go ahead and continue. And then I can see this information has output the way that I wanted it to here, and then we continue to the end. So now we'll be able to see that this session has been run within his client portal here, and we can view the answers from this past session here. What we would do next is make sure that he gets his hands on the second workflows link. So this would either be on a website, or this would be in a bundle, or this would be in an email of some sort. And since he's logged in and he's already filled out this information in the past that I have populated here, this information will already be populated, which can then be either copied and pasted or whatever else, and continued through, where at the end of this, the output document would then show the information as entered here with that apostrophe where we want it to be, because there's more than one. So that is how you can either do this internally, or you can have this be as part of the data persistence benefit of having your users logged in to their client portals when they take your workflows. Now, one bonus final fun thing we could do with the new bundles feature that was just released, I think last week, we can go over to bundles and we can add these two things together in a bundle. So we can say new bundle. Let's give this a name of just test repeating item push. And then we can say this is a test of the repeating item push. Say like address info, whatever you want to say here. Let's go ahead and say next. For the workflow sequence, we need it to be that repeating items push 1 happens first, then push 2. And this must be done in this order because there are things in push 2 that must be completed in push 1 first, because those variables don't exist unless you complete push 1 first. So then we would say next. I'm just going to make this free, but you could put this into a flat rate and you can decide when they pay and so on. So I'm going to say free and finalize this bundle. Now I can copy this bundle link and give it to that same user. For example, in this particular case, a person needs to be logged in order to complete a bundle. So they need to have an account and they need to sign in. But once they do, if they've already taken something similar where the underlying variables are the same, then it would look like this. So they would say start bundle. They can go over here to start their session. So this is that test repeating item push. I can start that first one. And what I'll see is that it's going to go automatically to the second page because I've already completed this information as this user in the past. So it's going to automatically complete that information for me from the repeating item. And then I'm going to say continue. Then I can go back to the bundle overview. And in this particular case, if I wanted this person to be able to change their answers, I could reinstate the final review page in that particular workflow. And then let's say I wanted to go on to the second workflow, I could say start. And then I can see that this information has already been populated since I already took this workflow before. I can edit this answer if I want to. I can continue. I can continue again, and that's going to output my final output document for this particular user who is using the bundle. So we'll be able to go in here and see their information right here. So this is just one way you might consider how you could combine different pieces of information within a repeating item into a second workflow or into the same workflow in different ways. Now, one thing we could just quickly look at a little bit closer before we move on is how I was able to actually use this text-based on prior answers configuration and adapt it a tiny bit for my purposes. So I went to this article. I just went down to the bottom and copied and pasted this particular code. I would need to, in this particular case, know my variables from the repeating item. So I just dropped that into an instruction block where I could then modify it for my own purposes. So this is going to be the comparison, for example, here. Oops, one second. Here. So instead of item name, I would need to replace that with the actual item name here, which in my case is company shareholders. So I would replace this with company shareholders. Then I would replace item attribute, but keep item dot. So for the item attribute, I would just say whatever one I want to use or more than one. So let's say, for example, In this case, I wanted there to be shareholder name. So I want their name to appear here first. So I just replaced item attribute with name, shareholder name. Then I wanted there to be a break, a line break between this piece of information and the next piece of information. So I used a BR or break. So then I took this and turned the next one into item.shareholder mailing address street, which is the information from here. Then I used item shareholder mailing address city. Then I added a comma and a space after it. Then I put in the state. Then I just put a space. And then I put in this last piece of information. So that is how you're able to utilize that piece of code from this particular help article about text based on prior answers. So I hope this was useful. At least it should give you some different information about how you might be able to play with these different elements in your output documents, your different workflows, and so on. So I hope that was useful, and I'll see you in the next one.